Welcome to A Guide to Every Deck in EDH, and today we're looking at Sythis Harvest's Hand. Now, this deck is pretty powerful, and you could argue that it's in the CEDH realm or just high power, but however you want to put it, it is a powerful deck. So what is this deck doing? It is a green and white Enchantress deck built around Sythis Harvest's Hand. Whenever you cast an enchantment spell, you gain 1 life and draw a card. So we want as many enchantments as possible so that our cards are always replacing themselves. And we want Enchantress effects that are more than just Sythis. Now, outside of that, green and white is not really a great color for having infinite combos, and especially Enchantress-related infinite combos. But the deck has some combos, but it's mostly going to rely on stacks and outvaluing the opponent. So what do we got? Well, apart from Sythis, we have, of course, our card draw, which includes a bunch of other Enchantress effects. So the best one apart from Sythis is Argothian Enchantress, since it has Shroud. But we also have Enchantress's Presence, Mesa Enchantress, Satyr Enchanter, Setessan Champion, and Verduran Enchantress. And then apart from those card draw spells, we also just have Sylvan Library and Esper Sentinel, because they're pretty good card draw spells in Selesnya combinations. We've got one piece of fast mana in Lotus Petal, although arguably you could perhaps put Elvish Spirit Guide in here as well, but this deck is not really built around a bunch of fast mana. And then our combo pieces, so we do have Devoted Druid, and we can combo that with either Luxior, Swift Reconfiguration, or Vizier of Remedies. In combination with any of those cards, it will produce infinite green mana, but not infinite mana of any other colors. And then we've got one Cloudstone Curio for other things that will become relevant later on, but at the minimum, it can bounce different enchantments, which will always trigger your various Enchantress effects. So every enchantment can always just become more snowballing card advantage if you have Cloudstone Curio. Then we've got just a ton of ramp, just an absolute gargantuan amount of ramp. So we've got all of our Mana Dorks, all of our Mana Rocks, but we've got additional enchantment-based versions of ramps that are more variable and unreliable, like Burgeoning, Exploration, and then of course, enchantment-based ramp, like Fertile Ground, Sanctum Weaver, and Utopia Sprawl, Wild Growth, and Wolfwillow Haven all get additional bonuses. Also, Smothering Tithe is better in this deck than it is in any other deck a lot of the time because, again, it's an enchantment and can trigger various Enchantress effects. Then we've got our spot removal. So we've got Darksteel Mutation, Kenrith's Transformation, Lignify, and Swords to Plowshares. Also, sometimes Swift Reconfig is removal, although it doesn't get rid of abilities. So if you're trying to hit creatures specifically to get rid of their abilities, this one does not do that. Then we've got our tutors, Eladamri's Call, Enlightened Tutor, Heliod's Pilgrim to fetch auras, Survival of the Fittest, and Worldly Tutor, since our main combos are built around Devoted Druid. And then we've got our more like uncategorized but value-based enchantments. So Hallowed Haunting, as long as you control 7 or more enchantments, creatures you control have Flying and Vigilance. And the more important part, whenever you cast an enchantment spell, create a white Spirit Cleric creature token with power and toughness equal to the number of spirits you control. So if you have this out, every single enchantment that you cast causes you to get an XX spirit, where X is your total enchantment count. So this is going to be your primary win con right here. You've also got Karmic Justice. Whenever a spell or ability an opponent controls destroys a non-creature permanent you control, you may destroy target permanent that opponent controls. So technically it doesn't protect your stuff, but it does dissuade your opponent from trying to interact with you. And then although you do have some artifact-based ramp in like Mana Crypt, Mox Diamond, etc., this deck does need to lean into the stacks route in order to win the game. So we are playing Collector Oof, Null Rod, and Stony Silence. It's generally going to hurt the opponent's mana-based or artifact-based mana production a lot more than ours, especially because we have so many other versions of ramp. We also have Deafening Silence and Eidolon of Rhetoric and Rule of Law as our Rule of Law. You can't cast more than one spell a turn cards. Rest in Peace to negate graveyards, which is relevant against all the various Underworld Breach decks and any other graveyard-based combo. We could have Helm of Obedience in this deck if we wanted to, but there's not a good way to tutor it up. It's also somewhat expensive, so I think Rest in Peace by itself is just fine. And then, of course, Thraneth Magistrate, which should basically be in every single white deck. The lands are pretty straightforward, although we get to play both Gaia's Cradle and Sarah's Sanctum to produce tons of mana. Cavern of Souls also relevant in order to make Sythis uncounterable. And then just a bunch of other cards that are for various green and white fixing. We also do have one Hall of Heliod's Generosity in case we need to fetch back enchantments that have gone to the graveyard for whatever reason. And an Urza Saga, mainly because, well, it is an enchantment, although you're not casting it, but mainly because it can tutor up Luxior. And at worst, it just tutors up like a Soul Ring or something. And then finally, we've got our protection spells. So Allosaurus Shepherd to make our green spells uncounterable. Destiny Spinner to make our green and enchantment, to make our creature and enchantment spells uncounterable. Also, once you have a sufficient number of enchantments and a sufficient amount of mana, the bottom ability can win the game by making our lands gigantic. Greater Oromancy and Sterling Grove protect our enchantments from being destroyed by spot removal. Sterling Grove can also top deck tutor an enchantment. And then in order to not get attacked, we've got Sphere of Safety, which is a ghostly prison for X, where X is our total enchantment count. So in this deck, it basically means our opponents can never attack us. And Moat, which shuts off non-flyers from attacking us, which is not all creatures, but a fairly sizable amount of them. So the main goal here is to outvalue the opponents via card advantage from all of the various Enchantress effects, including Sythis, and then stacks the opponent out with cards like Rule of Law, Stony Silence, etc., and eventually either get infinite mana via a combo like Devoted Druid, or just a lot of mana with cards like Sarah's Sanctum and Gaia's Cradle, or Sanctum Weaver plus the other enchantments in the deck, and then win via overrunning the opponent with Allosaurus Shepherd and the various mana elves in our deck, overrunning the opponent by turning lands into huge trampling beaters, or overrunning the opponent by making tons and tons of gigantic spirits. And that is pretty much the goal of the Sythis deck.